I spent a whole 10 minutes trying to position everything together. Yeah, this is the best that I can do. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, it's going to be a part 1 on making the replica of the Disney store Jasmine dress. And there's also another version, I think it's the D23 version, but my sister, this is not mine, this is my sister's, because people tend to buy these dolls and they're usually for collectors. It's a collector's item and they sell it on Etsy or eBay for like triple the price, and I think it's just not fair, but that's how they make a profit. But yeah, she's a beautiful doll. We don't really see that. I searched on YouTube and there's hardly any Disney Jasmine dresses, and only the ones that are made exactly from the movie, the Walt Disney movie. So lighting is just so bright. It's so bright. I'm just gonna position her back here. I'm trying to get comfortable. Without further ado, let's get straight on to how I made my dress. Instead of making my mock-up on my stand, I just downloaded a PDF of a crop top online and printed it out and then cut it out. And the great thing is that it came with a seam allowance, so I didn't have to put the seam allowance on top, which saves me so much time. You see this, you guys, this is calico and I'm using it as a mock-up, but even though it's calico, I'd pressed it. So it's so important to press your fabric down because it prevents wrinkles and it keeps the fabric tight as well, so there's no movement. So after trying the bodice on, it fits perfectly, so I went out and cut using the proper fabric. So this is the back piece, this is the middle piece to add more strength, and this is the top piece of the bodice. So I'm just going to sew all of these together, but I think I'm going to give it a good press first. I don't really have an overlocker, so I did a zigzag stitch at the end. You want to place your needle right at the edge of the fabric and then sew straight across. I don't know how to explain it. It should pick up the fibres at the ends and bring it in, so it's like a closure. Not exactly the best way to finish a seam, but for things like a shawl or if it's a bulky material, then I think it's okay. I mostly did this on curved edges or edges that fray a lot. Curved edges tend to stretch because it's on a curved seam in comparison to a straight edge. So yeah, I did zigzag stitches on both of the curved seams. So a good tip that I want to tell you guys is that I marked out the measurements for each seam that I do, so that when I do the inner fabric, it matches perfectly to my outer fabric when it's flipped over. I can't stress enough how important balance marks is. It acts like a guide to know where you're going to sew the fabric together, and it meets up on the curved edge of the seams, so it doesn't look odd because you can like end up sewing it together but the curve is here and then you have another one and the curve's down here. So a balance mark basically keeps everything symmetrical and balanced. So you see here where the balance mark is. I'm going to match it to the other side. I'm going to place a pin through here and it should come out on the other end here. So you have all of this. So you start by pinning the ends first and then the balance mark, and then you fill out the rest and then you sew. So this seam allowance is 2 centimeters. So I'm pressing the seams down to get it ready for the boning channels that I've made. The boning channels, or the boning pockets, are made out of calico, just scraps of calico, so it saves me fabric. Again, I zigzag stitch the pockets, because especially on the curved seams, because it has a lot of movement, and zigzag stitches are very useful when it comes to wanting fabrics to move a little bit more or have more movement in comparison to a straight stitch. Because this bodice doesn't have that much structure, it's quite simple, I don't have to worry too much about it being very tight. Okay, so now as you can see at the top part of the doll, the bodice, there's like 2 lines, and I know it's embroidered, but like I don't have time for embroidery, so I just straight stitched it. Before I straight stitched it, I wanted to make sure that it's accurate, so on the back side of the fabric I drew references of lines and where I wanted to straight stitch. I didn't need to do another line because I can just use my sewing machine as guidance and the first line that I've done, and I did like maybe half a centimetre apart. When it comes to bagging out the top piece and the back piece of the fabric, you want to make sure that all the seams are aligned with each other so it's symmetrical once it's bagged out. And you can see here that I'm showing that I'm using pins in order to make sure that it's all aligned, so when it comes to pressing all the fabric down, it's aligned and symmetrical. You guys, my camera stopped filming. Oh. And the sun's going down. But I'll still continue. So the next thing, I trimmed off the excess, but not to the point that it's meeting the stitches, otherwise it will start fraying. However, because of fabric tension, I did cut vertical lines across so that it releases some tension and it's more movable. I'm using Ridgeline boning, which is a plastic type of boning. It's cheap on the straight seams, and I'm using a thing called spiral seal boning on the curved seams, which is on the chest area, because it adds more movement but still adds structure. Spiral seal boning is a lot more difficult to cut, so I use some pliers. The shoulder seams were probably one of the most trickiest pieces to do, because I can't take the doll out of the box. So I was limited to what I can create with this pattern. I used references from YouTube and online, so the online pictures, and I did my very best. It's not exactly accurate, but it's not noticeable. So it tapers in towards the ends, but it expands in the middle. So I did that. You guys, I'm so shocked that the Cinderella video got hundreds of views. I did not expect that. But if you have watched it, I bought some bias binding tape, and what that does is that it neatens the raw edges, and I had some left over, so I just thought, well, why not use it? I'll save fabric and save money. I used bias binding tape to cover the raw edges at the bottom part of the bodice. I also made my own. I place needles right across on the line where it was ironed on. I know that there's a lot of embroidery on this work, but I don't have time for that, so I just cheated and I bought some trimmings. I bought some trimmings that were close to what the doll, right there. So I bought some trimmings similar to that. I bought 1 metre of it, and I'm glad that I did because I had some excess for the back part. The trimming was sewn by hand, because if it was machine stitched, I think it would just fray and ruin the trimmings. So yeah, I tediously sewn it by hand. This isn't part of the doll, but there's a store in Savers that sold gems, and it reminds me of the Sims logo, and I love the Sims, so yeah, I had to put it on. There's some trimming parts on the shoulders, and again I just bought some trimming for that in gold. It looks like it was gold. It could be silver. I don't know. This is almost done. Instead of eyelets, which is the circle metal pieces that are placed here, I used bias binding tape, and I made these myself. They work exactly the same, and you put a ribbon through and it tightens the back as a fastening, but I still want it to be adjustable, so I've added a back piece, an extra back piece, so that it's adjustable and it covers the back in case it's a bit too tight. And I'm going to hand sew it here so it doesn't move about. And lastly, I still have some extra of that trimming, so I'm just going to add it to the bottom so it conceals it a little bit and blends in together very nicely. Do you know the amount of thread needed for a project this big? I've used so much thread, and this is a roll, and this is on the bodice. Because I like the Catonic chiffon so much on my Cinderella dress, I thought it would be great for the puff sleeves, and I bought the exact same colour. The only problem with it doesn't match. I know on camera it's like a bit of a darker blue, but it's really, really light. So I had to go and buy a colour that's very similar to this. So it matches a lot more better, and I'm going to use that. I don't like wasting fabric, especially since I spend so much money on fabric. I'm going to use this as a mock-up piece to see how far I like the length to be before I go in and use my fashion fabric. I can't find ribbon that matches the same colour as my bodice, so I'm just going to use the same fabric that I use on my bodice and turn it into a ribbon. So I'm just going to cut it on the grain and then cut strips, and then I'm going to sew it on my sewing machine. To fold it, and then I'm going to bag it out. So this is what the strip looks like. And there you have it. It's a little bit over a metre, but yeah. For the sleeves, I've just cut like a, I don't know what you call, I don't know what shape this is, because it's quite short at the top, but it gathers at the bottom, so you want it to be a lot longer. I'm going to use an elastic band for this, and to measure out the top part of the sleeves, what I did was that I turned it inside and I measured it using a measuring tape, and then I put an extra like 1 centimetre seam allowance so I can actually sew it together. So it'll be flat at the top and then it'll be gathered at the bottom. I did this off camera, but last night I made my own bias binding tape. Bias binding tape per metre can cost like 60p, but I need like loads of meters, so instead I've just used some spare fabric that I had and just made some myself. And this morning what I'm going to do is put the bias binding tape on top of the raw edge of the sleeve. The bias binding tape on the top edge of the sleeves, and I also zigzag stitch the sides as well to prevent it from fraying. Unsure if this is the right way to do it, but I'm just basically going to hem it with a straight stitch, and then I'm going to thread this elastic through so it's stretchy. So I've just sewn a straight stitch all the way across the hem, and I'm going to thread it through with this elastic, and I've already measured it to my arm. I've used bobby pins instead of safety pins, because I think safety pins will just poke a hole through the fabric and I don't want that. So I'm just going to thread it through using a bobby pin, and it works just as well. Pinned my sleeves on the inside of my bodice, the inside of the armhole. I've done the exact same on the other side, and I'm going to sew it together by doing a blind hem stitch right at the edge of the bias binding tape. I've already done it on the other side. It looks completely invisible and seamless, which is really, really nice, and you can't see it on the main fabric either. You might be able to hear my parents downstairs, but I'm going to talk as loud as I can. So I have cut it into longer strips, so I cut it in half, and then I sewn the ends together. So this is going to be the right side of the fabric, and this is the wrong side of the fabric. I did the exact same. I did a zigzag stitch to prevent it from fraying. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hem it, so I'm going to fold it, and then to fold it again, and then I'm going to straight stitch right across. So I'm going to do that all around the shawl, and then I'm going to decorate it using flatbacks gems. So white flatback gems, not too much, just a little bit, so that it dazzles when whoever wears it spins around. So yeah, that's the plan for today. Because I know what the internet is like. My sister would be wearing part 1, which is the top, but my sister wears a thing called a niqab, so it's like a head cover but also a face cover. She doesn't wear it because she's dressed up as Jasmine. It has nothing to do with that. So please be respectful, and I hope you enjoy part 1 of the Jasmine limited edition doll dress.